In the shadow of the Balkan mountains, between the lands of the Illyrians to the west and the Macedonians to the south, there once lived a people whose name now echoes faintly through the corridors of history, the Dardanians. Their homeland lay in what is today Kosovo and parts of northern Albania, Serbia, and North Macedonia. It was a rugged and strategic region, filled with highlands, mineral-rich valleys, and winding rivers that connected them to both the Adriatic and the heart of the Balkans. To most of the ancient world, the Dardanians were mysterious, neither fully Illyrian nor wholly foreign. They were fierce, resilient, and proud of their independence. Ancient writers often described them as wild mountaineers, difficult to conquer, and even harder to rule. Yet, behind this reputation of barbarism, they possessed a structured society, organized tribes, and a complex culture that blended the influences of neighboring civilizations. The Dardanians were not just warriors, they were miners, herders, and traders. Their mountains were rich with silver and iron, resources that would attract both Macedonian kings and Roman generals. Archaeological findings from their settlements, hill forts, pottery, and weapons reveal a people deeply rooted in the land, with traditions that endured for centuries. But what made them truly significant was their location. They stood at the very crossroads of the Balkans, the line where great powers collided. To the south, Macedonia rose under Philip II and Alexander the Great. To the west, the Illyrian kingdoms extended their influence toward the Adriatic. And there, between them, the Dardanians carved out their own identity, sometimes as allies, sometimes as enemies, but always as survivors. Their kings, though less recorded in Greek and Roman texts, were said to have ruled from strongholds hidden deep within the mountains. They resisted Macedonian expansion repeatedly, even after many neighboring tribes submitted. The Dardanian king Bardilis, for instance, became a legend for standing against Philip II himself. Although eventually defeated, his legacy would mark the Dardanians as a people who never bowed easily. As the centuries passed, the Dardanians remained, adapting to new rulers and new realities. But somewhere in this long and turbulent history lies a question that still divides scholars and nations alike. What became of them? Did their bloodline fade into obscurity, or did it continue, transformed through time, into one of the peoples that now call the Balkans home? Some believe the Dardanians were the direct ancestors of the Albanians, that their ancient language evolved into what is now spoken in Tirana and Pristina. Others argue they vanished entirely, absorbed by waves of migrations and empires. But before diving into those debates, we must first see how this once proud people rose to power, and how they faced the might of the greatest empire the world had ever seen. As the world around them changed, the Dardanians stood their ground. The rise of the Macedonian kingdom under Philip II brought war to their doorstep. The Dardanians were no strangers to conflict. They had long fought with their southern neighbours for control over trade routes, fertile lands, and influence. But Philip's campaigns were unlike anything they had faced before. The Macedonian phalanx, disciplined and relentless, broke through many Illyrian tribes. Still, the Dardanians resisted fiercely. Even after Philip's victories, the Dardanians refused to fade into the background. During Alexander the Great's reign, they were still mentioned as a threat, one that required constant vigilance from Macedon. Their homeland was mountainous and difficult to conquer, offering natural fortresses that made invasion costly. As Alexander turned his gaze east toward Persia, the Dardanians remained unconquered, a reminder that even the greatest empires had their limits. After Alexander's death, his vast empire fractured, and the balance of power in the Balkans shifted once again. The Dardanians took advantage of this chaos. They reasserted their independence, raiding neighboring territories and rebuilding their strength. By the 3rd century BC, they had become a significant regional force, powerful enough to influence events far beyond their borders. It was during this time that they began forming what many scholars call the Dardanian kingdom. Archaeological evidence suggests a growing central authority, possibly ruled from Skupi or Nisus, cities that later became important Roman centers. This kingdom was not an empire, but a federation of tribes united under strong leadership, a loose but resilient network capable of mobilizing large forces. They played a complex game of alliances. Sometimes they sided with the Macedonians against other Illyrian tribes. Other times, they joined those tribes to push back against Macedonian influence. Their position between rival powers forced them to adapt constantly, and that adaptability would later become crucial when a new power entered the region: Rome. The Romans first heard of the Dardanians through reports of Illyrian piracy along the Adriatic. When Rome launched its Illyrian wars in the 3rd century BC, the Dardanians watched closely. They knew that once Rome conquered the coast, it would eventually move inland. And it did. During the Macedonian Wars, the Dardanians became both Rome's problem and its opportunity. They sometimes fought alongside the Romans against Macedon, and sometimes they attacked Roman allies when it suited them. The Dardanians were practical. Survival came before loyalty. Yet their defiance impressed even the Romans. Despite repeated campaigns, Rome struggled to subdue them completely. It wasn't until the late 2nd century BC, during Rome's expansion into the Balkans, that the Dardanians finally lost their independence. Their lands became part of the Roman province of Moesia, and with that, centuries of self-rule came to an end. But even under Roman control, the Dardanians didn't disappear. They adapted again, serving as soldiers, traders, and local leaders in the new imperial system. Still, their identity remained stubbornly distinct. Roman records continue to mention Dardanians as a recognizable group long after their incorporation into the empire. And in the following centuries, that persistence would lead some to believe that the spirit, and perhaps even the blood, of the Dardanians lived on through the people who would later call themselves Albanians. Under Roman rule, the Dardanian lands transformed, but not overnight. The Romans were practical conquerors. They built roads, fortresses, and towns, gradually weaving this once rebellious region into their imperial network. Dardania became part of the province of Moesia, later split into Moesia Superior, and eventually emerged as its own province under Emperor Diocletian in the 3rd century AD. This administrative change might sound small, but it meant something deeper. Rome recognized Dardania as a distinct region with its own character and importance. The Dardanians adapted to Roman life, but traces of their identity persisted for generations. They served as auxiliary troops in the Roman army, guarding borders and outposts across the empire. Their warriors, once feared by Macedonians, now fought under Roman banners. Inscriptions found across the Balkans show Dardanian names still being used well into the 4th century AD. Even their rugged homeland continued to bear their name, a rare continuity in a region constantly reshaped by empire. And yet, beneath this Romanized surface, a quiet transformation was unfolding. As Latin influence mixed with native Illyrian languages, new dialects and identities began to emerge. This linguistic evolution is one of the key arguments in the modern debate about the origins of the Albanian people. According to one theory, the Illyrian hypothesis, modern Albanians are the descendants of the Illyrians, and particularly of tribes like the Dardanians, who survived Romanization and maintained their tongue through centuries of change. Linguists who support this view point out that the earliest centers of medieval Albanian life, in regions like Dardania and northern Albania, align closely with the ancient Dardanian territory. But not everyone agrees. Other scholars favour the Thracian or Daco-Motian hypothesis, suggesting that the Albanian language descended from peoples further east, beyond Dardania. This view argues that while Albanians later settled in former Dardanian lands, their origins may have been rooted in a different branch of the ancient Balkan world. The problem is evidence, or the lack of it. The Dardanians left behind no written language, no inscriptions in their native tongue. Everything we know about them comes from Greek and Roman sources, written by outsiders who rarely understood local customs deeply. Linguistic reconstructions and archaeological finds can only go so far. Still, the continuity of settlement is striking. From the Roman period to the early Middle Ages, Dardania remained inhabited, its towns, valleys, and fortresses never entirely abandoned. Even as Gothic, Hunnic, and Slavic invasions swept across the Balkans, people endured there, holding on to their traditions in the mountain refuges. When the first mentions of the Albanians, or Arbaresha, appear in Byzantine texts nearly a millennium later, they are found in roughly the same area once called Dardania. It's a coincidence too precise to ignore, and for many historians, it suggests a deep-rooted continuity, a link between the Dardanians of old and the Albanians of the medieval world. But continuity alone doesn't prove descent. Were these truly the same people, evolving through centuries of empire and invasion? Or had Dardania's original inhabitants disappeared, replaced or assimilated by newcomers who simply inherited their land and name? By the early Middle Ages, the ancient name Dardania faded from maps, replaced by Byzantine provinces and Slavic toponyms. Yet, the people of the region endured, their mountains and valleys still echoing with familiar traditions and dialects. When the Albanians finally appeared in historical sources around the 11th century, their homeland was not far from where the Dardanians once lived. This overlap fuels the enduring idea that the Albanians are, in essence, the last descendants of the Illyrian Dardanians, a people who survived empires, invasions, and cultural shifts while preserving the essence of an ancient Balkan identity. Many Albanians see this as a matter of pride and continuity, a direct link to the first known inhabitants of their land. But others, especially in neighbouring countries, view this claim with skepticism. Some scholars argue that the Albanians might have arrived later, from areas further east, mixing with remnants of Illyrians and Thracians alike. To them, the modern Albanian identity is not a straight line from Dardania, but rather a complex tapestry woven from many Balkan peoples. Genetic studies add another layer of intrigue. While they show strong continuity in the Western Balkans, meaning people there are largely descended from ancient populations, they can't confirm a specific ethnic or tribal connection. DNA doesn't carry cultural names, only bloodlines. So, did the Dardanians truly become the Albanians? Or did their legacy dissolve into the broader Balkan mosaic, remembered only in legend and geography? The truth may lie somewhere between myth and memory, a reflection of how history, identity, and pride intertwine in a land where the past never really disappears.